What if a single moment on an ordinary flight could reveal the deepest wounds of our society? One man boarded with quiet pride, a black veteran, a successful CEO, a father. He expected nothing more than a safe trip home. But within minutes, a shove from a flight attendant turned his journey into something else, a question of dignity, of justice, of who is truly respected when no one is watching. In that instant, he faced a choice. Should he stand and fight, risking the label of being angry? Or should he stay silent, trusting that truth would one day find its way to light? Now imagine if it were you or someone you love in that seat. How would you respond? What would you want the world to see? This is more than a story about one man. It's about how quiet courage can change systems, how dignity under fire can ground an entire plane, and how one call can shift the course of justice. Stay with us, because this journey will make you ask yourself, what does it really mean to stand tall when the world tries to push you down? Please like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss stories that inspire and heal. The cabin lights had just dimmed. That soft golden hue passengers recognize as the start of a routine flight. Seatbelts clicked. Overhead, bins closed. The engines humming low. People scrolled on their phones, adjusted pillows, and whispered to their children. Everything felt ordinary until it wasn't. It started with a sharp voice. "Sir, sit down. Now." Every head in row 12 turned. Daniel Cross, a tall black man in his early 50s, had risen halfway from his seat. He wasn't rushing the aisle or causing a disturbance. He was reaching to adjust his carry-on bag, making sure the corner wasn't pressing against the shoulder of the woman seated beside him. His movements were calm, deliberate, almost too careful, the way a man moves when he knows people are watching him for the wrong reasons. But Clara Hayes, the flight attendant assigned to this section, snapped as if he had crossed some invisible line. Before Daniel could respond, she stepped forward and shoved his shoulder back into the seat. The sound was small, a dull thud of fabric against fabric, but the silence it created was deafening. The older gentleman in the aisle across, a retired school teacher named Gregory, blinked in disbelief. A young man, 2 rows back, instinctively pulled out his phone, angling it just enough to capture what was happening. A mother holding her baby gasped softly. Daniel didn't say a word. His chest rose, then fell. Years of military training, years of boardroom negotiations, years of living in a world that judged him the second he walked into a room, all of it gathered in that single breath. Clara's words hung in the air. "You people always think you're special." For a split second, time slowed. The phrase echoed with venom, settling like poison in the cabin. Everyone heard it. Nobody misunderstood it. Daniel's jaw tightened. His hands rested on his knees, steady. He didn't push back. He didn't raise his voice. But inside, memories flickered, flashes of deserts under a burning sun, carrying wounded brothers in arms, hearing thank you for your service from strangers who had no idea what that service cost. And now, here he was, shoved in a seat for daring to adjust his own bag, reduced to you people. The irony cut deep, the same uniform folded neatly in his carry-on. The one that once commanded respect had become a reason for contempt. Passengers exchanged nervous glances. Should someone intervene? Should someone speak? The tension was so heavy you could almost hear the engines strain against it. But Daniel moved first. He didn't confront Clara. He didn't lecture the cabin. Instead, he reached slowly into his pocket and pulled out his phone. His thumb hovered. then tapped deliberately, opening a secure message thread labeled AM. He typed just 3 words. It happened again. A pause. The dots appeared, then vanished. Then came the reply, where Daniel typed back Flight 268. En route, in uniform. Another pause. The reply came swift and short. Sit tight. Daniel placed the phone face down on his thigh, folded his hands, and stared straight ahead. His silence spoke louder than anger ever could. Clara, perhaps realizing the eyes locked on her, huffed and moved down the aisle, but the damage was done. For Daniel, every second afterward felt like a test. He thought about his daughter Maya, a first-year law student who had inherited both his stubbornness and her mother's compassion. He thought about the nonprofit he had founded for veterans transitioning back to civilian life. He thought about the countless nights he told young soldiers that dignity wasn't given. It was defended. And yet, defending dignity didn't always mean standing tall. Sometimes it meant sitting still. Sometimes it meant enduring the shove, absorbing the insult, and waiting for the right moment to act. His mind drifted back to Fallujah, 20 years earlier. He could still taste the dust in the air, hear the whine of rotor blades, feel the weight of his fellow Marine slumped against him. Back then, it was his strength that saved lives. Now, it was his restraint. Passengers whispered. One muttered, "That wasn't right." Another shook his head, whispering to his wife. She pushed him. Did you see that the young man with the phone checked his screen? Yes, he had caught the whole thing. But Daniel didn't lean over to ask for proof. He didn't announce, "Record this." He simply waited. Outside, the engines thundered higher as the plane climbed. Inside, the tension refused to settle. Minutes crawled. Clara reappeared with a forced smile, pouring coffee for the row behind Daniel, laughing too loudly at a joke from another passenger. She didn't look at him again, but the other passengers did. Their eyes flicked between Daniel and Clara, between calm dignity and fragile authority. Gregory, the retired teacher, leaned slightly across the aisle. His voice was low. "Careful, sir. Are you all right?" Daniel turned his head, offered a polite nod. "I'm fine. Thank you." But Gregory saw the set of his jaw, the weight behind his eyes. He had taught hundreds of students in his lifetime, and he knew when someone was carrying more than they let on. In the back of the plane, Clara whispered to another attendant, her words sharp, her gestures clipped. Daniel couldn't hear her, but he didn't need to. He'd seen this dance before, someone trying to rewrite the narrative before it fully unfolded. His phone buzzed again. One line, "Working on it. Stay calm." He almost smiled. Whoever else in the world underestimated Daniel Cross, Colonel Aaron Miles never did. Aaron had been his commanding officer once, now an advisor on aviation security. If anyone understood the stakes, not just of a shove, but of what it symbolized, it was Aaron. Daniel straightened in his seat. He felt the eyes on him, the silent solidarity of strangers who weren't sure how to help, but knew wrong when they saw it. The engines roared, the cabin settled, but beneath the surface, something had shifted. The flight was no longer routine. One shove, one insult, one call, and nothing about this flight would be the same again. The plane leveled at 35,000 feet, gliding smooth above the patchwork of clouds. To most passengers, the hum of the engines was a lullaby. They settled in, tapping keyboards, flipping magazines, tugging blankets up to their chins. But for Daniel Cross, Every second carried a heavier weight. He sat motionless, his broad shoulders pressed against the narrow seat, his eyes fixed on the small screen embedded in the seat back ahead of him, though he wasn't really watching the cartoon map crawl across the Atlantic blue. His mind replayed the moment again and again, Clara Hayes's sharp voice, the sudden shove, the words, "you people," every time the memory looped, a new layer of meaning peeled back. It wasn't just the humiliation of being pushed in front of strangers. It was the quiet assumption laced in her tone that no matter who he was, what he had done, or what uniform lay folded in his bag, he would always be less than. Daniel had fought wars overseas, but the quieter war, the one inside boardrooms, airports, restaurants, was a different battlefield altogether. One without clear victories, one that left scars just as deep. He adjusted his breathing. Inhale, hold, exhale. The way his therapist taught him after the nightmares came back years ago. His pulse slowed, but the heaviness lingered. Beside him, Gregory, the retired schoolteacher, shifted. He had been pretending to read a paperback, but his eyes flicked often toward Daniel. Finally, he closed the book and leaned closer. "Son," Gregory said softly, his voice the kind of steady that comes from decades of common classrooms. "You handled that better than most men would." Daniel offered the faintest smile. "Doesn't feel like it." "Oh, but it does," Gregory replied. "I saw the way she looked at you, and the way you stayed still. You gave her nothing to twist, nothing to use against you. That takes strength." Daniel nodded, though his gaze drifted to the aisle where Clara moved with mechanical precision, offering pretzels and sodas to other rows. Her smile stretched too tight. She avoided his section altogether. He thought about Maya again. What would he tell her if she asked about this? That her father stayed calm while a woman half his size shoved him and spat venom in public, or that he made a call that could alter the course of the entire flight? His phone buzzed quietly in his pocket. He slipped it out, angling the screen low. A new message from Aaron Miles HQ informed, "Captain will know soon. Don't escalate. We've got you." Daniel exhaled. Just seeing Aaron's words grounded him. The man had pulled him out of firefights, patched him up when shrapnel ripped through his side. If Aaron said, "We've got you," then Daniel knew this wasn't just going to disappear into thin air, but still part of him wrestled with doubt. What if passengers believed Clara's version? What if they painted him as the aggressor? He knew the script all too well. The angry black man, overreacting, dangerous. His reputation could shatter with a single accusation. He rubbed his thumb against the edge of the phone, steadying his thoughts. "Discipline is everything," he reminded himself. His drill instructor's voice whispered it like a ghost from the past. The seatbelt sign pinged again as the plane hit a pocket of turbulence. Drinks trembled, bags rattled faintly in the overhead bins. Patricia, the elderly woman in the red scarf seated 2 rows up, clutched her armrest. She turned back toward Daniel, offering a faint nod of solidarity. Her eyes said what her lips didn't. "I saw it. I'll stand with you." The reassurance warmed him, if only slightly. Clara, however, seemed to bristle under the turbulence as if the skies themselves were mocking her authority. She snapped at a young mother with a crying infant. "Keep your child quiet. Please." The word sliced, and the mother shrank into her seat, face flushed. Daniel's fist tightened in his lap. He wanted to step in, to say something, but he held still. He knew the moment was coming. Aaron's text had promised it, and Daniel had learned long ago that patience could be sharper than any blade. Half an hour later, the captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some unexpected weather shifts. Please remain seated with your belts fastened. We'll keep you updated." His tone was calm, but Daniel caught something else, an undertone of caution, a note that carried more than just weather. His instincts sharpened. Moments later, Clara marched down the aisle, her lips tight. She stopped near row 14, leaned into the interphone handset on the wall, and spoke in hushed tones to the cockpit. Daniel couldn't hear the words, but the flick of her eyes toward him told the story well enough. She was already building her case. Passengers noticed. Whispers floated. She's trying to blame him, but everyone saw what happened. "I think that guy's a veteran." The young man with the phone shifted, scrolling through the clip he had captured earlier. The shaky frame showed everything: the shove, Clara's words, the stunned silence. His finger hovered over the share button, torn between staying quiet or sending it to the world. Daniel caught his eye, offered a small shake of his head. Not yet. Timing mattered. Once the truth was out, there would be no pulling it back. Better to let the official wheels of accountability spin first. 10 more minutes. The cabin grew restless. The turbulence passed, but the tension did not. Clara returned, pacing, her arms folded tight as though holding in her own unraveling. She glanced at Daniel, and for the first time, he saw it: fear. Not of him, but of the consequences circling closer with each passing mile. His phone buzzed again. Aaron's message: prepare, possible diversion. Captain briefed, stay composed. Daniel's pulse ticked up. A diversion that meant the airline was already treating this as a security incident. Not just a spat between passenger and crew. If that was true, the situation was far larger than Clara realized. He leaned back in his seat, staring at the tiny vent above his head. The hum of recycled air filled the silence between his thoughts. He remembered once telling a room of veterans at his nonprofit, "You don't always get to choose your battles, but you always get to choose how you fight them." And here he was, living that truth. The engines shifted pitch. A subtle descent began. Outside, clouds thickened, painting the windows gray. Gregory frowned, glancing out at the sudden tilt. "We're not near Chicago yet, are we?" he muttered. Daniel didn't answer. He knew. The storm wasn't weather. It was accountability. Closing in fast. His phone lit again. One last line from Aaron Plain is being grounded. "Nashville. Stay calm when they board." Daniel closed his eyes, steadying himself. The moment was here. Not the battle he asked for, but the one that found him. Once again, 35,000 feet above the earth. Nothing about this flight would end as expected. The descent began so gently that most passengers didn't notice at first. The captain's voice announced a minor weather diversion, but Daniel Cross knew better. Years in uniform had taught him how to read between the lines. The slight pitch of the engines, the way the flight attendants stiffened, the hushed whispers exchanged over intercom, none of it matched turbulence. This was something else. Daniel kept his breathing even. His phone rested dark in his lap. Aaron's last message still glowing in his memory: plane is being grounded, Nashville, stay calm when they board. Gregory looked uneasy. He leaned across the aisle, lowering his voice. "This doesn't feel like weather to me, son." Daniel turned his head, eyes steady. "It's not." The old man nodded, gripping the armrest. He had seen enough in his years as a teacher, enough injustice, enough moments when people chose silence instead of courage. Something about Daniel reminded him of those rare students who held their ground with quiet strength. Passengers grew restless as the plane tilted further into descent. A baby whimpered. Luggage rattled above. Clara Hayes walked briskly down the aisle, offering a clipped reassurance. Nothing to worry about, folks. Just some rerouting for safety. Her smile was thin, her eyes betraying unease. But the cabin wasn't convinced. Too many had seen what happened earlier. Too many had caught the venom in her words. And the man she shoved, the one who hadn't raised his voice, hadn't retaliated, sat like an anchor in the storm, unmovable, commanding silent respect. Daniel glanced out the window. Through breaks in the clouds, city lights glittered below, sprawling and unfamiliar. Nashville. His chest tightened. He hated disruptions, hated drawing attention, but this was no longer about him alone. It was about everyone watching, everyone who had ever been told you people in one way or another. The landing gear clunked down. The plane vibrated as tires kissed asphalt, bouncing once before settling into a rolling hum. Passengers exhaled collectively, some in relief, some in confusion. Why Nashville? Why not continue? The answer came moments later. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain's voice boomed, steadier now. "We will be parking at a remote stand for a brief security check. Please remain seated until instructed." A hush spread. Words like security check stirred unease. Gregory shot Daniel a look. "They're here for you, aren't they?" Daniel didn't answer. He didn't need to. His calm silence was confirmation enough. The aircraft slowed, pulling into an isolated corner of the tarmac. Out the window. Blue and red lights flashed against the night. Several vehicles waited airport security, police cruisers, and a black SUV with tinted windows. Murmurs rippled through the cabin. Phones lifted, screens glowing as passengers recorded. Clara stiffened near the galley, her arms folded tight. She whispered harshly to another attendant, who looked more nervous than complicit. Then the door opened. The rush of humid Tennessee air mixed with jet fuel filled the cabin as two uniformed officers boarded, followed by a tall man in a gray suit with a government badge clipped to his lapel. His presence radiated authority without a word. All eyes turned to Daniel. He stood slowly, without instruction, his broad frame unfolding with military precision. His movements carried no defiance, only composure. The cabin seemed to hold its breath. "Mr. Cross the suited man asked. Daniel inclined his head. "That's me. Would you step forward with us?" "Sir," before he could move. Gregory called out, surprising even himself. He didn't do anything wrong. We all saw what happened. A ripple of agreement followed. Patricia, the woman in the red scarf, lifted her frail hand. That attendant pushed him. He never raised his voice. Phones angled higher. Passengers murmured louder, emboldened. Clara's face drained of color. The suited man raised a hand for calm. "We're aware of the situation. We'll be speaking with all involved." His tone was neutral, professional, but his eyes flicked to Daniel with recognition respect. Even. Daniel stepped into the aisle. His phone buzzed once more, a message flashing across the screen. "I'm here." He glanced toward the open doorway and saw him Colonel Aaron Miles, older now, hair silvered at the temples, but presence as commanding as ever. Their eyes met, and in that wordless exchange, Daniel felt the weight in his chest lighten. This wasn't just an intervention, it was a reckoning. Aaron nodded slightly, then turned to the suited officer. "Mr. Cross will come with us. Treat him with the respect his service demands." Clara sputtered from the galley, her voice cracking. "He was aggressive. He stood up during turbulence. He threatened the safety of the cabin." Her words were cut short by a dozen voices overlapping. "That's not true. He barely moved. You shoved him, I recorded it." The young man, 2 rows back, finally spoke up, holding his phone high. "I've got the whole thing on video, every word she said, every shove." Gasps filled the cabin. Clara's mouth opened, then closed again, her rehearsed defense unraveling in real time. The suited officer gestured firmly. "Ma'am, step forward as well." Clara hesitated, panic flickering in her eyes, but under the weight of every lens, every stare, she obeyed. Daniel walked steadily down the aisle, flanked by Aaron and the officers. His heart thudded, not in fear, but in the strange quiet that comes before truth breaks open. He caught Gregory's nod. Patricia's whispered thank you. The quiet solidarity of strangers who had become witnesses. As he stepped through the doorway into the humid night, the cameras followed. Not just the ones in passengers' hands, but the unseen eyes of the world about to watch. For Daniel, this was no longer about one shove, one insult, or one flight attendant's prejudice. It was about what came next, how dignity was defended not by fists, but by truth carried on every witness, every recording, every voice refusing to stay silent. And as the cabin door shut behind him, he knew the real turbulence was only beginning. The sterile hum of Nashville International Airport security office filled the silence as Daniel Cross was guided inside. The air smelled faintly of coffee left too long on a burner and the metallic tang of recycled ventilation. Bright fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, throwing sharp shadows on the floor. Daniel's boots clicked against the tile as he followed Colonel Aaron Miles through the narrow corridor. They were led into a wide room with rows of chairs, a desk at the far end, and cameras perched like watchful eyes. Gregory, Patricia, and the young man with the phone were asked to wait in a separate area for statements. Clara Hayes sat across the room, her arms folded tightly, face pale but chin lifted as though clinging to authority she no longer had. An officer with a notepad approached Daniel. "Mr. Cross, we're going to need your statement. This will be on record. Do you understand?" Daniel nodded. His voice came low, steady. "I understand." Aaron stood nearby, hands clasped behind his back, presence solid. He wasn't here in uniform, but he carried the weight of it in every movement. His silent support anchored Daniel in the sea of flashing cameras and whispered assumptions before the officer could begin. Clara shot forward in her chair. He was aggressive from the start. She blurted. He stood up during turbulence. He wouldn't listen to instructions. And when I tried to keep order, he threatened me. I was protecting the cabin. Her words tumbled too fast, too rehearsed. The officer raised a hand, scribbling on his pad. "You'll have your turn, Ms. Hayes." Daniel exhaled quietly. He had expected this, her version of events crafted to paint him as the danger. He had seen it before, the reshaping of truth into a weapon. When his turn came, Daniel spoke simply. He recounted each detail with precision, his tone even. He described how he adjusted his bag, how Clara shoved him down, how she uttered the words, "You people." He didn't embellish. He didn't raise his voice. He let the weight of the facts stand on their own. The officer listened, occasionally glancing at Aaron, who nodded subtly at key moments. When Daniel finished, silence hung for a beat too long. Then the young man with the phone entered. His name was Marcus Lee, a college sophomore visiting family. Nervous but determined, he held his phone out with both hands. "I recorded it," he said. "All of it." The room shifted. The officer took the phone, replayed the clip. The dull thud of Clara's shove filled the room, followed by her cutting words. Everyone in earshot froze. The evidence was undeniable. Clara's face drained of color. "That's out of context," she snapped. But her voice wavered. "No," Marcus said, his own tone steadying. "That's exactly what happened." Patricia entered next, wrapped in her red scarf. Despite her frail hands, her voice rang clear. "I saw it too. He never once raised his voice. That woman laid hands on him without cause. I won't lie about what I saw." Gregory followed, calm but firm. "If I taught my students anything, it was to tell the truth, even when it's hard. The truth is that man showed restraint while being disrespected. She's the one who endangered the cabin with her behavior." The officer's notepad filled quickly. The picture foreman was unmistakable. Daniel sat in silence, hands folded as the walls around Clara's version crumbled. Yet inside, a storm churned. A part of him wanted to feel satisfaction, vindication, but another part whispered of weariness. Why did it always take witnesses, recordings, overwhelming evidence, just to prove what he already knew? Why did dignity have to be defended like this? He caught Aaron's eye. His old commander gave him the smallest nod, a silent reminder. "This is bigger than you. Hold steady." Clara's voice rose, shrill with panic. "You're all against me. You're twisting this. I was doing my job." She looked around desperately, searching for a lifeline, but found none. Even her fellow attendants had grown quiet, avoiding her gaze. The officer closed his notepad. "Ms. Hayes, you'll be suspended pending further investigation. Mr. Cross, you're free to go. Thank you for your cooperation." Clara lurched to her feet. "Suspended. He should be removed from flying. Don't you understand he's enough?" Aaron cut in sharply, his voice carrying the authority of command even now. The room fell silent. "You put your hands on a veteran, on a passenger who followed every instruction, and you disgraced not just yourself, but the uniform you wear." Clara's mouth opened, then closed again. For the first time, her defiance cracked into fear. Daniel rose slowly, straightening to his full height. His voice, though quiet, filled the room. "I didn't want this. I didn't ask for this, but it happened. And now you all have to decide what it means. Not just for me, for every person who's been shoved down and told they don't belong." His words lingered, heavy and unshakable. Later, outside the security office, Aaron walked beside him through the quiet terminal. The night air from the glass doors smelled faintly of rain. They paused near a row of empty chairs. "You all right?" Aaron asked. Daniel's shoulders sagged slightly. "I don't know. I stayed calm, did everything right. But why does it feel like I lost something anyway?" Aaron considered him for a long moment. "Because dignity shouldn't be something you have to fight for. It should already be yours. But listen, Daniel, what you did up there, that restraint, that composure. You didn't just defend yourself. You showed everyone what justice looks like when you refuse to sink to their level." Daniel looked away, eyes tracing the tarmac lights outside. "I just wanted to get home." "I know," Aaron said softly. "But sometimes home has to wait. Sometimes the fight finds you whether you want it or not. In the distance, reporters were gathering near the gates, tipped off by passengers who had already uploaded videos online. Hashtags were appearing, voices rising, the ripple of one shove turning into a wave. Daniel inhaled deeply, steadying himself once more. He could feel it the beginning of something larger than this night, larger than this flight, and he wasn't sure he wanted it, but he knew he couldn't walk away. The glass doors of Nashville International hissed open, letting in the thick night air. Daniel Cross stepped outside with Colonel Aaron Miles beside him, the chill of fluorescent interrogation still clinging to his skin. But outside was no refuge. Reporters clustered like moths to flame, microphones thrust forward, cameras flashing with frantic urgency. "Mr. Cross, can you confirm what happened on board Flight 268? Were you assaulted by the flight attendant? Do you plan to sue the airline?" The questions came rapid fire, each one sharp, each one demanding. Daniel lifted a hand in quiet refusal. He didn't want to be anyone's headline. He wanted to go home, to call Maya, to rest his bones from battles he never asked to fight. Aaron leaned closer, murmuring, "Keep walking. Don't give them anything yet." Daniel obeyed, steps measured, eyes fixed on the curb where black SUVs waited. But then, from the corner of his ear, he heard Clara's voice. She was behind them, flanked by airline officials, her tone shrill as she spoke to the cameras. He was out of control. "I was only doing my job. They're all twisting this." Daniel's jaw tightened. He didn't turn around, but he felt the words trying to cling to him, to stain his silence. The temptation burned to stop, to set the record straight. Yet he remembered Aaron's advice. Timing mattered. Let the truth walk on its own legs, inside the SUV. The noise faded. Aaron settled across from him, arms folded. It's already spreading. "Daniel." Passengers uploaded the video. "It's viral." Daniel pressed his palm against his forehead. "I didn't want this." "No one ever does," Aaron said. "But you can't control how truth travels once it's out there." Daniel closed his eyes. He pictured Maya's face, the sharp intelligence in her eyes, the way she always challenged him to see both sides of a story. She would have seen the clip by now. She would have questions, and he would have to answer. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Her name lit the screen. He hesitated, then answered. "Dad." Her voice trembled between anger and worry. "I just saw the video. Did she really push you?" "Did she say yes?" he said softly, cutting off her pain before it could spiral. "But I'm okay. You shouldn't have to be okay with that." Maya shot back. "You fought for this country. You built everything you have, and still they—" Her words broke. Daniel's chest ached. "I know, baby girl, I know. But listen to me, I stayed calm. I didn't let her win by making me lose myself." There was silence, then a choked breath. "I'm proud of you, Dad, but I'm so tired of watching you carry this weight." Her words pierced deeper than Clara's shove ever could. He swallowed hard, whispering, "Me too." The call ended, leaving him staring at the dark blur of highway lights beyond the window. Each glow seemed a whisper of stories untold, of people unseen. By the time they reached the hotel where he would wait out the night, the news cycle had already shifted into overdrive. Screens in the lobby displayed his image, grainy from passenger videos. The headline scrolled, "Veteran allegedly assaulted on flight investigation underway." He wanted to disappear into the quiet of his room, but Aaron stopped him at the elevator. "You need to decide. Daniel, You can let this play out without you, or you can step forward and shape it. But silence. Silence lets them tell the story however they want. Daniel looked at his old commander, the man who had once ordered him into firefights with a map and faith. And what if I don't want to be a symbol? Aaron's eyes softened. Then you'll still be one. Sometimes the world decides that for you. The elevator doors opened, and Daniel stepped inside alone. The ride up was slow, filled with the low hum of machinery. His reflection stared back at him in the mirrored wall's tired eyes, shoulders sagging under burdens visible and invisible. In the quiet of his room, he finally let the weight sink onto his chest. He sat on the bed, fingers pressing into his knees. The truth was simple. He didn't want to lead another battle. He had led enough. He had lost enough. He wanted to be a father, a man, not a headline, but the world outside was no longer quiet. Notifications poured in, messages from friends, colleagues, veterans he once mentored, words of solidarity, outrage, pride. We saw what you did. You held your ground. You carried us all in that silence. Daniel exhaled, staring at the phone buzzing on the nightstand. His inner voice argued against itself, one side urging him to retreat, to let this storm pass, the other whispering that this was bigger than his exhaustion, bigger than his comfort. He rose, walked to the window, and looked down at the city. Neon lights blurred with raindrops on the glass. He remembered the faces on the plane, Gregory's nod, Patricia's raised hand, Marcus Lee's trembling phone held steady, strangers who had risked their voices because he had chosen restraint. A question pressed against him, unshakable. If they found the courage to stand, how could he remain sitting? His phone buzzed again, this time a message from Maya. Just 5 words. Don't let them rewrite this. Daniel's breath caught. The storm outside the runway had found its way into his heart. He knew then that silence was no longer an option. He sat at the desk, opened his laptop, and began typing. Not an angry rant, not a speech for cameras, just his truth, laid bare. He wrote of dignity, of restraint, of the countless invisible battles veterans and black men carried every day. He wrote so that Maya, and anyone else who needed the words, would know they weren't alone. And as his fingers moved across the keys, a strange calm settled over him. Perhaps he hadn't chosen this battle, but perhaps, in choosing his voice now, he could turn the turbulence of one flight into a path toward clearer skies. Morning light streamed into the hotel room, slicing through blinds and spilling across Daniel Cross's desk. The glow highlighted the open laptop, the half-empty coffee cup, the sleepless night etched into his face. His words were still on the screen, raw and unpolished, a mixture of testimony and confession. He hadn't planned for anyone to read them, not yet, but already his phone buzzed with requests, journalists, networks, organizations. Everyone wanted his story. Aaron knocked once before letting himself in. He carried 2 cups of strong coffee, setting one down in front of Daniel without a word. His eyes scanned the laptop screen, then shifted back to his friend. You ready for what comes next? Daniel rubbed his temples. I don't even know what comes next. Aaron sat across from him. The airline issued a statement early this morning. They called it an unfortunate misunderstanding. Said they're investigating. He paused, waiting for the words to sink in. They didn't name you. They didn't name her. Just words designed to make this vanish quietly. Daniel's jaw clenched. A misunderstanding. He laughed without humor. They saw the same video. There was nothing to misunderstand. "They're protecting themselves," Aaron said. "But the public's not buying it. The clip's been replayed on every channel. People are angry. Veterans groups are rallying. Civil rights organizations are calling. They want you to speak." Daniel leaned back, staring at the ceiling. "And if I don't," Aaron's voice lowered, "then they'll still speak. But without you, and Clara's version will creep into the gaps you leave empty." Silence filled the room, heavy with decision. Daniel wasn't afraid of speaking. He had given keynote addresses, chaired corporate boards, testified before committees. But this was different. This wasn't business. This was personal, carved into his dignity. He feared what it would cost to relive it again and again, in front of strangers who saw only headlines. His phone rang. Maya's name lit the screen. He answered, her voice spilling through with urgency. "Dad, they're twisting it already. Some outlets are quoting sources saying you were disruptive. You have to tell them the truth." Daniel closed his eyes. "Baby girl, I don't want this to consume us. You've got your studies. This isn't about me," she cut in. "It's about you, about everyone who's been treated like that. You always told me silence helps the wrong side. Don't you forget your own words now." Her passion pierced his resistance. He saw in her the same fire her mother once carried, the same refusal to bow to injustice. He whispered, "I hear you." After the call, Aaron leaned forward. "She's right. You have an opportunity here, Daniel, not just for yourself, but for change." Daniel stood, pacing the room. His reflection in the mirror caught his eye, broad shoulders, slightly stooped, eyes shadowed with exhaustion, but a presence that still carried weight. He thought of the passengers who had spoken up: Gregory, Patricia, Marcus, ordinary people who had chosen truth over silence. If they could stand, how could he not? He turned back to Aaron. "If I do this, I do it my way. No shouting matches on cable news, no circus, just truth, plain and steady." Aaron smiled faintly. "That's the only way you've ever led. By afternoon." Daniel agreed to one interview, a live conversation on a national evening broadcast. The producer promised no sensationalism, no interruptions, just his voice, before going on air. Daniel sat alone in the green room, staring at his hands. They were scarred from battles long past, calloused from decades of building a career. He flexed them slowly, remembering Clara's shove, remembering how close he came to reacting in anger. His restraint had carried him here. Could it carry him further? The anchor greeted him warmly on set, cameras adjusting, lights glowing hot. The first question came gently. "Mr. Cross, can you walk us through what happened on Flight 268? Daniel breathed deep. "Steady." I stood up to adjust my bag. The flight attendant told me to sit. Before I could respond, she pushed me down and said, "You people always think you're special." I didn't yell. I didn't move toward her. I sat still. The anchor nodded, letting the silence stretch. Viewers at home felt the weight in his tone. "Why didn't you respond in anger?" she asked. Daniel looked directly into the camera. "Because I've lived long enough to know what happens when men like me are painted angry. One shout, one step too fast, and suddenly I'm the threat. I chose silence because sometimes silence tells the truth louder than words." The studio was quiet. "What do you want people to take from this?" the anchor asked finally. Daniel's voice softened, breaking slightly. That respect is not a privilege. It's a right. That veterans, that black men, that anyone deserves dignity when they board a plane, walk into a store, sit at a table, and that sometimes the only way to fight is not with fists, but with patience, with witnesses, with truth. When the broadcast ended, messages flooded in. Veterans groups pledged solidarity. Civil rights leaders praised his composure. Thousands of strangers shared their own stories under the hashtag that had already taken root, Dignity in the Skies. Back at the hotel, Daniel sat quietly, scrolling through the messages. One in particular made him pause a note from Marcus Lee, the young man with the phone. I almost didn't record. I was scared. But when I saw you sit so still, I knew I had to do something. Thank you for teaching me what courage looks like. Daniel's eyes blurred. For years, he had carried the weight of survival, of responsibility. He had wondered if the battles meant anything, if the scars had purpose, and now, in the simple words of a stranger, he felt a glimpse of answer. Aaron entered, catching the look on his face. What did I tell you? The world was going to decide you're a symbol whether you liked it or not. Daniel chuckled softly. Maybe, but at least now, I get to choose what kind. That night, as he lay in bed, exhaustion finally pulling him under, he whispered a promise to himself and to Maya, and to every unseen witness out there. This wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of something larger. The morning after the interview, Daniel Cross woke to the muffled sound of traffic outside the hotel. His phone buzzed with more notifications than he could possibly read, articles quoting his words, social media posts echoing his steady voice, invitations to appear on panels and news programs. Overnight, he had become more than a passenger on Flight 268. He had become a symbol of dignity under fire. Aaron sat at the table near the window, already suited, sipping his second cup of coffee. "You're trending," he said without looking up. Daniel groaned. "I didn't sign up to trend." Aaron smirked. "That's the thing about symbols. You don't choose it. It chooses you. The only decision left is what you do with it." Daniel rubbed the sleep from his eyes, staring at the light creeping across the carpet. "And if I just go home, if I let it pass," Aaron set the mug down with a sharp clink, "then the narrative belongs to them, to the airline, to Clara's defenders, to anyone who wants to twist this into something it wasn't. But if you speak, if you stand, it belongs to you and to every man and woman who's been shoved into silence." Daniel said nothing. He thought of Maya's voice, fierce over the phone. He thought of Marcus Lee, the student who recorded, writing that Daniel's composure gave him courage. He thought of Gregory and Patricia, whose words had carried truth when his silence couldn't. Could he abandon them now? Later that day, Daniel was escorted into a private conference room at the airline's Nashville office. The executives were waiting. A semicircle of tailored suits and stiff smiles. Timothy White, Vice President of Customer Relations. Rose first, "Mr. Cross, we deeply regret the events of Flight 268. We're conducting a full investigation and we want to resolve this in a way that honors your experience." Daniel studied their faces. "You mean you want me quiet?" The room shifted uncomfortably. One of the attorneys cleared her throat. "We're prepared to offer substantial compensation, lifetime upgrades, public recognition of your service." Daniel raised a hand, cutting her off. "This isn't about upgrades. This isn't about a check. It's about why someone like Clara was still working after multiple complaints. It's about every passenger who didn't have a video or a witness. What's your answer for them?" The room fell silent. For a moment, only the hum of the air conditioning filled the void. Timothy adjusted his cufflinks, then leaned forward. "We are reviewing all personnel files. We will commit to new training modules, bias prevention programs, and stricter oversight." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "Words are easy. Policies are easy. Change is hard. Will you let me help ensure this doesn't fade when the cameras leave the executives exchange glances?" Finally, Timothy nodded. "If you're willing, Mr. Cross, we would like to engage you as a consultant. Independent oversight, not a figurehead." It was a start. But Daniel felt the weight of it pressing already what it would mean to carry not just his story, but the stories of countless others who never had a platform. He gave a slow nod. "Then, let's see if you mean it." That evening, back at the hotel, Daniel sat with Aaron on the balcony, the Nashville skyline flickering beyond. The weight of the day pressed against him, heavier than any boardroom negotiation. Aaron broke the silence. "You realize this could become national policy, FAA, Department of Transportation. Even Congress might look at this if the pressure builds. They'll want you to testify." Daniel's stomach tightened. Testify again. He thought of the years he'd spent advocating for veterans' mental health, the testimonies he'd given in cold rooms where lawmakers nodded politely and did little. Did he have the strength to go back into that arena? This time as a victim instead of a strategist, Aaron watched him closely. "You're not just a CEO anymore, Daniel. You're a veteran who was shoved, a black man who was dismissed, a father whose daughter demanded truth. You're all of that in one body. That's why people are listening." Daniel turned away, staring at the lights below. "And what if I'm tired of carrying it? What if I just want to live my life, run my company, walk my dog, visit my daughter?" His voice cracked at the end, betraying the fatigue he kept buried. Aaron's voice softened. "Then you'd still deserve peace. But sometimes, peace only comes after you make sure no one else has to fight the same battle." That night, Daniel scrolled through more messages. One from a retired pilot who confessed he had witnessed discrimination but stayed silent, too afraid of losing his job. Another from a young black mother who said she had been humiliated on a flight last year but was too scared to report it. And then one from a soldier stationed overseas. "Sir, watching you keep your bearing reminded me what discipline means. You gave me strength." He set the phone down, pressing his palms into his eyes. He couldn't ignore it anymore. His silence wasn't his own. It belonged to every story waiting to be told. The next morning, Maya called again. Her voice was softer this time. "Dad, I saw the interview. You were calm, steady, but I know you. I could hear the hurt underneath. I just want you to know, whatever you decide, I'm proud of you." Daniel's throat tightened. "You always know the right words." "No, Dad," she said gently. "You do. That's why the world's listening." When the call ended, Daniel stood at the mirror again. He adjusted the jacket he hadn't worn since the incident, the tear at the seam still visible. He considered mending it, but left it as it was, a scar on the fabric, just like the ones on his skin. Not something to hide, but something to remember. That afternoon, he drafted a letter not to the airline, but to the Department of Transportation and the FAA. In clear, precise words, he outlined what happened, the systemic failures it revealed, and the reforms needed independent complaint reviews, third-party training, transparent accountability. He signed it not only as Daniel Cross, CEO, but as Daniel Cross, Marine veteran, father, citizen. As he sealed the envelope, he whispered to himself, "If I have to be a symbol, let it mean something." And, deep down, though fear and exhaustion still tugged at him, Daniel felt a quiet resolve. He had been shoved into silence once. Never again. The letter Daniel Cross sent traveled faster than he imagined. Within 48 hours, it had been circulated across congressional offices, forwarded through networks of advocacy groups, and quoted in national papers. What he thought would be a simple statement of fact had become a rallying document. Headlines called it the Cross Letter, framing him as both whistleblower and reformer. On the third morning after sending it, Daniel was invited to Washington, D.C. The Department of Transportation wanted to meet. The airline, sensing the growing storm, scrambled to show cooperation, sending Timothy White and a small entourage to join the meeting. Daniel's flight to Washington was quiet. For the first time in days, no one shoved a camera in his face or asked for a quote. Yet he could feel the weight of attention pressing against him like air too thick to breathe. Aaron accompanied him, seated just behind. His steady presence reminding Daniel that this was not a battlefield he walked alone. The meeting took place in a tall glass building overlooking the Potomac. The conference room was filled with officials, policy advisors, and airline representatives. At the far end sat Secretary Linda Carver, her gray hair swept into a bun, her eyes sharp but not unkind. She extended her hand. "Mr. Cross, thank you for coming. I read your letter twice. You put into words what many of us have ignored for too long." Daniel shook her hand firmly. "I didn't write it for applause. I wrote it because silence was no longer an option." The discussion began formally, with Timothy White presenting the airline's new commitments: mandatory training, enhanced oversight, an anonymous reporting hotline. Daniel listened, arms crossed, hearing the same polished phrases he had encountered in boardrooms for decades. When Timothy concluded, Daniel leaned forward. "Training modules don't stop a shove," he said evenly. "Hotlines don't erase humiliation. You want change? Then you build accountability into your bones. Independent review boards, binding consequences, protection for whistleblowers. Otherwise, this is theater." The room shifted. Several officials glanced at one another, gauging reactions. Secretary Carver rested her chin on her hand, watching him with a faint smile. "Mr. Cross, if we were to form an independent advisory council, would you serve on it?" The question landed like a stone in water. Daniel hesitated. He thought of his company waiting back home, of Maya studying, of the quiet mornings he longed for. But he also thought of Clara Hayes, still suspended but not yet terminated. He thought of the soldier overseas who had written to him. He thought of Marcus Lee, whose trembling hands had held the phone steady. "Yes," he said finally, "but I won't sit on a panel that exists only for press releases. If I lend my name, it must carry weight." Secretary Carver nodded. "Then let's make it real." After the meeting, as he stepped into the crisp D.C. air, Daniel felt both triumph and exhaustion. Cameras swarmed outside the building, microphones thrust toward him. For the first time, he didn't wave them off. He spoke calmly. "This isn't about one flight, one shove, or one man. It's about dignity for every traveler. If we can't guarantee respect at 30,000 feet, then what hope do we have on the ground? The quote played on evening news across the country. Commentators debated whether he was the new face of reform in aviation, some comparing him to civil rights leaders of past decades. Daniel found the comparisons uncomfortable, but he didn't correct them. Sometimes symbols grew larger than the men behind them. That evening, alone in his hotel room, Daniel opened his laptop to find a video message waiting. It was from Patricia, the elderly woman in the red scarf. Her voice quavered but carried conviction. "Mr. Cross, I want you to know I spoke up because you sat still. You reminded me of my late husband, a man who never raised his voice but made people listen all the same. Don't stop now." Daniel's eyes blurred. He had spent so many years in boardrooms where strength meant volume, where deals were won by the loudest bidder. Yet here, in the quiet dignity of witnesses and strangers, he saw a different kind of strength, one he had carried unknowingly all along. Later that week, the airline called with an update. Clara Hayes's employment was terminated. The announcement was brief, couched in legal phrasing, but it was final. For Daniel, it was not satisfaction he felt, but relief a knot loosened. Justice, at least in part, had been served. Maya called that night. "I saw the news," she said, her voice softer than before. "They finally fired her." Daniel exhaled. "It doesn't erase what happened." "No," Maya agreed, "but it proves something. It proves they can't just sweep this away." For a moment, silence stretched between them. Then Daniel said, "Maya, you were right. Silence does help the wrong side. I almost let it." "You didn't," she whispered. "That's what matters." Days later, Daniel sat in his office back home, stacks of files waiting, emails blinking on his screen. The world of finance felt oddly small after the halls of Washington, yet his company needed him. His employees counted on him. He balanced spreadsheets in the morning, drafted reform proposals in the evening, living in two worlds at once. Aaron visited often, reminding him that leadership wasn't a burden to carry alone. "You're not just Daniel the CEO anymore," he said one night over dinner. "You're Daniel the bridge, between power and people, between silence and voice." Daniel sighed, setting down his fork. "And what if I never asked for that role?" Aaron smiled gently. "History doesn't ask permission." The following week, Daniel received an invitation to testify before a congressional committee on transportation safety and equity. The letter was formal, stamped with seals, but the subtext was clear. They wanted him to be the face of reform. He read it twice, his pulse steady. The battlefield had shifted again. As he set the letter down, he looked at the photograph on his desk, Maya on her first day of law school, beaming with pride. He whispered to the photo, "If I do this, it's for you, and for every soul who deserves to walk through this world with head held high." The Capitol building loomed against a pale winter sky, its white dome glowing under the early morning sun. Daniel Cross walked up the stone steps with measured calm, a navy suit pressed sharp against his broad frame. At his side, Aaron Miles kept stride, silent but steady, a constant anchor. Daniel had been here before testifying as a corporate leader, as an advocate for veterans' health, but this felt heavier, more personal. Inside, the air buzzed with tension. Reporters lined the hallway, cameras flashing, voices overlapping with shouted questions. "Mr. Cross, do you believe airlines systematically discriminate? Do you think race played the biggest role?" Daniel kept his gaze forward, offering no soundbite. He had promised himself he would only speak in full truths, not fragments. The committee room filled quickly, senators, representatives, staffers, witnesses, and an audience that spilled into overflow chambers. On the table before him sat a placard, Mr. Daniel Cross, CEO and Marine veteran. He looked at it for a long moment. The two titles that defined him, leader and soldier, now stood side by side, bound to a moment born of humiliation. When the gavel struck, silence fell. Senator Alvarez, chairing the committee, opened with formal words before turning to Daniel. Mr. Cross, thank you for joining us. We've read your letter. We've seen your interview. But today, we want your story on the record. Daniel adjusted the microphone. His voice was low, steady. Madam Chair, members of the committee, on December 11th, I boarded Flight 268 as a paying passenger. When I stood to adjust my bag, a flight attendant shoved me back into my seat and said, "You people always think you're special." I did not resist. I did not shout. I sat, silent, because I knew anger would only confirm her prejudice. Gasps rippled faintly through the audience. Daniel let the quiet linger before continuing. This was not an isolated act. Complaints had been filed against the same attendant before. The system failed to act. And so it continued until it reached me, until a video exposed it. But what of the passengers without a camera, without a voice? How many sat in silence while dignity was stripped from them? Senator Alvarez leaned forward. Mr. Cross, what reforms do you believe are necessary? Daniel drew in a breath. Independent review boards not controlled by airlines, whistleblower protections, mandatory reporting of discrimination incidents to the FAA, and training that doesn't just check boxes but changes culture. He paused, then added, and consequences that are real, not hidden behind closed doors. A senator across the aisle interjected, Mr. Cross, some say your story has been exaggerated, that this was a misunderstanding blown out of proportion by social media. How do you respond? Daniel's eyes fixed on him. Unblinking, I was there. My body remembers the shove, my ears remember the words, and the video speaks for itself. To call it a misunderstanding is to call truth a lie, and I will not let that stand. The room stirred, reporters scribbled furiously, cameras zoomed closer. Daniel felt the pressure but stayed composed. When the questioning shifted to other witnesses, Daniel exhaled quietly, shoulders loosening. Patricia was called next, her red scarf neatly draped. She spoke with trembling conviction. I saw what happened. I heard what she said. Mr. Cross did nothing wrong. He sat still, dignified. It was the most shameful thing I've ever seen on a plane in my 72 years, and I couldn't stay quiet. Then Marcus Lee, the young student, stepped forward. His hands shook as he adjusted the microphone. I was scared to film, but I did it because I thought, if I don't, they'll say it never happened. Mr. Cross's calm gave me the courage, and now I know I did the right thing. Their testimonies amplified Daniel's, weaving a chorus of truth. After hours of questions, the hearing concluded. Senator Alvarez offered closing remarks. Mr. Cross, your composure in the face of injustice has not only exposed a systemic failure, but given us a roadmap forward. This committee will pursue legislation inspired by your testimony. Thank you for your service to this country, in uniform and beyond. The gavel struck again. The hearing was over, but Daniel knew it was only the beginning. Outside, The steps of the Capitol were swarmed with press. This time, Daniel paused. He spoke clearly, his words measured for those who would listen. Today was not about me. It was about every traveler who has been silenced, dismissed, or humiliated. Dignity should not depend on race, status, or luck. It should be the baseline of every journey. The crowd erupted with questions, but Daniel moved on, escorted by Aaron, his face calm but his heart pounding. He had not wanted this stage, yet now it was his. That night, back at the hotel, Daniel sat in darkness, city lights flickering through the curtains. His phone buzzed again, but he ignored it. He thought of Maya, picturing her watching the hearing online. He thought of his wife, gone too soon, and what she might have said. "You were born for this, Daniel." He thought of every passenger whose stories now filled his inbox, strangers turning their pain into solidarity. Aaron knocked once before stepping inside. "You did good today." Daniel shook his head. "I don't feel good. I feel hollow, like I poured everything out." Aaron set a hand on his shoulder. "That's what truth does. It empties you, but it also makes room for change." Daniel stared out the window, his reflection caught against the glass. For years, he had built wealth, led companies, earned titles, but none of that had given him the weight of today. None of that had made him feel so exposed and yet so necessary. "Maybe," he said softly, "this is what service looks like when the uniform comes off." Weeks passed after the hearing, but the echoes of Daniel Cross's testimony lingered in the air like the contrails of a jet across a clear sky. The Cross letter had evolved into the Cross Act, draft legislation now circulating through Congress with bipartisan support. The proposals were straightforward independent oversight panels for airline complaints, whistleblower protection for employees, public transparency reports on bias-related incidents. For the first time in decades, airline accountability wasn't just a talking point. It was on the table. Daniel returned to his city, to the office that had once been the center of his universe. The glass windows of his headquarters gleamed against the winter sun, but he felt different walking through them. Colleagues greeted him with admiration, some with quiet awe. They weren't looking at him as just their CEO anymore. They were looking at him as a man who had stood in the eye of a storm and refused to bend. Still, the transition was not seamless. Daniel struggled to bridge the worlds of corporate leadership and public reform. At board meetings, numbers and forecasts felt almost trivial compared to the letters piling on his desk, letters from passengers across the nation. A single mother describing how her mixed-race son had been harassed on a flight. An elderly veteran who had been denied boarding despite a valid ticket. A flight attendant who admitted she had seen discrimination but feared retaliation if she spoke. Each letter became a reminder that his story was part of a tapestry far larger than himself. Maya visited one weekend. Her law books spread across his dining table as she pored over case precedents. "Dad," she said, looking up from her notes, "do you realize your name is already being cited in debates? They're calling it the Cross precedent." Daniel chuckled dryly. "A few months ago, I was just a man trying to get home. Now I'm a precedent." Maya smiled. That's how change works. Ordinary moments turn into turning points. Her words gave him pause. He remembered the shove, the sting of humiliation, the choice to remain still. At the time, it had felt like survival. Now, it had become a catalyst. The airline, under pressure, launched sweeping reforms. They called them the Clear Skies Initiative, promising culture change, training, and transparency. Timothy White reached out to Daniel again, this time less as a corporate shield and more as a man seeking guidance. "Mr. Cross," he said over the phone, "we'd like you to help design this program. We don't want it to be window dressing. We want it to last." Daniel hesitated. He thought of the energy it would demand, the scrutiny it would draw, the toll it might take. But then he thought of Marcus Lee, of Patricia, of every unseen passenger who might never get another chance at justice. "If we do this," Daniel replied, "we do it honestly. No shortcuts." Weeks of meetings followed. Daniel sat across from airline executives, policy advisors, training experts, and even frontline crew. He listened more than he spoke, letting their stories pour out. A young flight attendant confessed that she feared losing her job if she reported misconduct. A gate agent admitted he had bent rules for elite passengers while ignoring others. Daniel's presence made them speak truths usually buried under layers of bureaucracy. One evening, exhausted after a 12-hour session, Daniel returned home to find a small package waiting. Inside was a framed photograph, a still image from Marcus's video. It showed Daniel seated, Clara's hand mid-push, his expression calm, steady, unyielding. Marcus had attached a note. "This moment changed me. Thank you." Daniel stared at the photo for a long time. It was not a picture of triumph, but of restraint, of pain held quietly, yet it had become the seed of change. The following month, the Senate committee passed the Cross Act unanimously. The vote drew rare applause across party lines, reporters calling it a rare moment of unity born from dignity. Daniel watched the broadcast from his office, Maya at his side. She reached for his hand. "You did it, Dad." He shook his head gently. "We did it. All of us who refused to stay silent." That night, Daniel took a solitary walk by the river. The city lights shimmered on the water, and for the first time in months, he let himself breathe deeply, without the weight of immediate battles. He thought of his wife, gone too soon, and whispered into the night, "I hope I carried it well." Aaron met him on a bench by the water. They sat in companionable silence for a while before Aaron spoke. "You know, Cross, this isn't the end. You've started something bigger than you." Daniel nodded. "I know, but maybe that's the point. It was never supposed to be about me." Aaron chuckled. "You always hated the spotlight, and yet here you are, lighting the way." Daniel smiled faintly. For the first time, he felt not burdened by the role thrust upon him, but reconciled with it. He realized he could carry both truths at once, the pain of the shove and the power of the aftermath. Months later, on a quiet spring afternoon, Daniel boarded a flight again. The cabin smelled faintly of coffee and new upholstery. As he took his seat, a young flight attendant approached, nervous but earnest. "Mr. Cross," she said softly, "I wanted to thank you. Because of the new training, I feel safe speaking up when something's wrong. I feel like I can actually protect people now." Daniel's chest tightened with unexpected emotion. He nodded, his voice steady but warm. "That's all I ever wanted." The plane took off, climbing smoothly into a sky streaked with sunlight. Daniel closed his eyes, the hum of the engines steady in his ears. For once, he wasn't waiting for conflict. He was simply a traveler, like anyone else, deserving of peace in the air. He thought of Maya, of Aaron, of Patricia and Marcus, of every voice that had risen beside his own. He thought of the word that had carried him from silence to reform dignity. And, for the first time since that December morning, Daniel Cross felt light. Life often gives us moments where our dignity is tested in ways we never expected. Daniel Cross's story reminds us that true strength is not always found in raising our voice, but sometimes in the power of restraint. By choosing calm over anger, he turned a humiliating shove into a movement that reformed an entire system. For older generations, this lesson resonates deeply. Many of us know the quiet pain of being overlooked, dismissed, or treated unfairly. We've carried those moments silently, believing endurance was our only option. But Daniel's journey teaches us that silence does not have to mean defeat. With patience, truth, and the courage to act at the right time, even a single moment of injustice can become the seed of lasting change. The message is clear: dignity is not a privilege to be granted. It is a right to be honored. And sometimes, the most powerful legacy we leave is not in what we accumulate, but in the example we set when life presses us down and we choose to rise with grace. Thank you so much for spending your time with us and for walking through this journey of dignity, courage, and justice. Your support means the world. If this story touched your heart, please give it a like, share it with someone who needs hope today, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Together, we can keep telling stories that matter.